Hey there, this is Ron, and as the title of this video would suggest, the subject matter is why I do not assign contracts to buyers anymore. Now I know that's going to become a shock to you because if you've heard the word ACTS, you know what that's all about, which stands for Assignment of Contracts and Terms System. So I've got 5 good reasons why I don't assign contracts to buyers anymore. I'm going to go through those reasons here in a minute. But first, let me try to explain to you how I do things today. It's not that we're not doing ACTS deals, it's just we're doing them a little differently than we did for the last, I don't know, I've been actually doing it this way for 8 or 10 months now, but when we started ACTS about 3 years ago, we were assigning contracts to buyers, and that's how we learned how to adapt and change our system the way we have it today. So let me see if I can, I'm going to take this slowly because you're going to have to, in fact, if you're a little groggy right now, slap yourself and wake up because I'm going to need your full attention on this one. And I'm going to be shocked if you get it first go around. But let me try. All right, let's say we're going to be doing a lease option deal. And it's a deal that's probably 100% financed, or maybe even overfinanced, I don't know. Or maybe it's not and you got some equity in it. Either way, the only way you can take control of it from the seller is to lease option it from the seller. Now your intent is to assign that contract because you can't see any reason to stay in the deal, which means there's probably no equity in it and or there's no monthly spread in it between the rent you collect and the rent you pay out. So there's really no reason to stay in it. Your whole goal, your whole agenda is to option it for price A and assign your contract for price B to someone who wants to live in the house. Now we are dealing with owner-occupied properties here and assigning contracts to owner-occupants. There's no investors deals here. This is not like wholesaling houses, even though it's similar because it's an assignment of contract. Normally, let's say the house, we'd lease option it for $200, and we'd go find a tenant buyer who would like to lease option it for who's got $10,000. Normally, you would assign the contract, collect check for $10,000. But that's not what we're going to do here today. Today, we're going to lease option it from the seller for the $200,000 for X dollars per month with an X term. And instead of going out and finding a buyer to assign that to, instead, my company, your company, ABC Homebuyers Inc., ABC Homebuyers LLC, is the company that will have the agreement with the seller. So now here comes buyer that's got 10 grand and we like them. We think they can make the monthly payment. We think they'll do what they say they're going to do. So the proper way to do it is for ABC Homebuyers LLC to lease option it to the buyer and raise the price by $10,000. Let me say that again. I'm going to sublease it to the tenant buyer. I'm going to raise the price to $210,000, showing a $10,000 non-refundable option deposit from the tenant buyer to ABC Homebuyers LLC. So I have an agreement from a buyer and I have an agreement from the seller. Right now I'm in the middle. That's called a sandwich lease option. I've leased it for $200, I've subleased it for $210, I get to keep the $10,000. Now, after that's done, if I decide I don't want to be in the deal anymore because there's really no monthly spread in it, and there's no equity in it, I can then take the contract from my buyer and assign it back to my seller and get a release of the original agreement from my seller. I'll say it again. My new agreement between ABC and my buyer will be assigned back to my seller. From that day forward, my seller will collect rent payments from my buyer. I'll be out of it. I get a general release from my seller. In other words, the agreement that we had is no longer in effect. And then I'll get a general release from my buyer because my buyer will be told at that time that they will now be paying the seller direct, and I'm out of it. I have nothing else to do. I'll be collecting no payments. I'm not responsible for anything that goes on with the deal. Now, the seller should gladly accept that assignment. It is in their best interest. They get to deal directly with the buyer. And there's no reason for them not to, but you know what, if they want to give me a hard time about it, they don't want to accept it, it's not really a problem. I'll probably just elect to stay in it anyway, go ahead and collect the rent and pay the rent, and there's advantages for doing that. For example, if that buyer moves out and they forfeit that $10,000 and I get to go sublease it again, plus if I get an agreement with my seller, my deal will be the loan balance at the time of purchase, or at the very least, my loan balance is going to decline every month. I'm going to set it up so that my purchase price is not fixed. It's going to decline every month. If I'm going to stay in the deal though, and sublease it out to my tenant buyer, I probably won't set it up that way. My purchase price will be fixed to my buyer. So the short of that is that I'm going to get the benefit of the debt pay down if I do stay in it. So I do get some compensation for staying in it, assuming my tenant buyer doesn't move out and I go get to do it again. Plus the value of the property might go up. There are some pockets around the country right now where the values are going up pretty substantially, and it very well may make sense to stay in this deal. Therefore, if your buyer doesn't buy the property, then you can now put it back out there at a much higher price if they bail out on you later. So, hey, I can make you a case to stay in all of them, but if you don't want to stay in it, you can always have the right to assign your lease with your buyer back to your seller. Now, there's 5 good reasons why I want you to do that. Reason number 1, we've learned that when a buyer gives us $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, they really want to see their name on the lease option agreement. If you'll think about it, for me to assign my agreement to them, that's one little old sheet of paper and it's assignment of a lease purchase, and their name is not on the lease purchase agreement. I'm just assigning the one I have with the seller to my buyer. So now we're not going to do that. We're going to create a whole new lease option agreement from my buyer to my company, and then the buyer will be part of it, and they'll feel like there is a legitimate deal, and they'll see their names all over the contract. Number 2, if I sublease to my buyer will never really know what deal I had with my seller. Whereas if I assign a contract to my buyer instantly knows the deal that I have with the seller, because they'll have to see the contract I'm signing. I may not want my buyer to know I just made $10,000 from them. However, if I sandwich lease to them, they have no idea about my original agreement, so I don't have to explain how much money I made from them. And thirdly, it works the other way. When I assign my contract from seller to buyer, seller's going to find out what I'm collecting from the buyer. I have no choice. I'm not going to be able to assign my contract and keep everybody in the dark. However, when I'm in the middle, when I'm leasing it from the seller and then I'm sandwich leasing it to the buyer, my seller has no idea what my buyer's paying either, so therefore I don't have to deal with their greed. If I'm agreeing to give the seller, I don't know, $1,000 or nothing, usually when we lease option properties we give the seller nothing. So now if I go out and collect $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 from my buyer, you know, how can you shouldn't be surprised if the seller's greed gland starts swelling up and they want to know why they're not getting part of that money. Well, I didn't agree to give them that money. They agreed to take nothing down on a lease purchase, so I gave them what they agreed. That doesn't mean that they're going to exactly like it when they see me making a bunch of money. So if I install the tenant buyer in the house and then assign it back to the seller, then the seller will probably learn at that time, but it won't matter. But I don't need their permission, and they can't destroy my deal and get greedy and try to prevent me from closing the sale until after I got the money, which in fact, I've done what I said I was going to do. I'm perfectly happy collecting $20,000, $30,000. I don't have to explain anything to the seller. However, that doesn't mean that they couldn't be a problem on that exit and probably destroy the buyer's attitude if we were to get into some kind of a disagreement on the terms. All right, and then so fourthly, here's the big one. If I were to assign that contract to that buyer and collect that $10,000 in my example, that buyer cannot use that assignment fee toward their down payment. An assignment fee is not a down payment. Whereas if I write up the contract for $210,000 and show a $10,000 non-refundable option deposit, then obviously they can use that toward their down payment because it's part of the purchase price. So let me say it again, an assignment fee cannot be used as credit toward a down payment from your buyer. However, a non-refundable option fee can be. Well, it can't be a non-refundable option fee if I'm simply assigning a contract from a seller to a buyer. So this helps the buyers big time. And when you start getting into the luxury homes, the higher end stuff, I mean, come on. There might be plenty of times when I'll get a $10,000 fee and assign it and the buyer could care less. But when they start bringing in $20, $30, $40, $50,000 fees, you better believe they care, and they're going to want every bit of that applied toward that down payment. And then lastly, of my 5 reasons is, if you're putting a property under contract, at least purchase it, and then assigning that contract with clear intent to never buy the property, and especially if you happen to disclose that somewhere in your documents somewhere, that I'm not going to buy this property unless I sell it, there is a case to be made that you're acting as a realtor without a license. You need a license to put buyer and seller together to collect a fee. Now look, don't go crazy on me here. If you have the property under contract to at least option it, then it is likely, in fact, in most states, you have every right to go put a lease option tenant buyer in it without being licensed because you're a principal in the deal. But look, what bothers me is when you make it so clear. What bothers me is when students go out and do stupid stuff. That's what bothers me. So I'm trying to prevent you from doing that, because if you make it real clear that I have no intentions of ever buying, and all I'm doing is looking for a buyer to plug into a house and collect a fee, then a case can be made that you're acting as an unlicensed real estate agent. However, if I'm lease optioning it from the seller, and then I am totally subleasing it to my buyer, I'm a principal in the middle, and it will be very difficult to make a case that I'm not a principal in the deal, because I literally am, especially if I stay in a deal on a sandwich lease option. But even if I assign it back to the seller, at least I am a principal and have clear evidence to that effect. So anyway, I think that's 5 good reasons why you should adapt to, we're calling this the iOS 8 plan, not the iOS 7 plan. Just remember, things change. We got to change with them as we learn, and then I'll pass it on to you. And anything that I pass on to you, I believe is in your best interest, or I certainly wouldn't do it. So from now on, don't assign the lease options to the tenant buyers, sublease it to them, and then if you want to get out anytime thereafter, you can assign that back to the seller. On this lesson, I am going to attempt to explain the downside of doing subject to deals. I think I first better explain what a subject to deal is, if I'm not mistaken, and then I'll show you how I handled one recently when I had a decision to make on what was best for the customer. And I want you to keep in mind what I'm about to tell you, because you're going to get an awful lot of opportunity to let people just deed you the house and leave the loan in their own name, and that'd be the end of it. And that's what subject to is, incidentally. If a seller just hands you the deed, well, don't hand it to you, they'll create a new deed. Your attorney will create a new deed, and the seller hands you the deed. That's called taking title subject to the underlying loan. Subject to means that the loan stays in the seller's name. You're not assuming it. You're not filling out an application. Nobody will check your credit report. You don't need the lender's permission. You don't need to do anything except let the seller give you the house if that's what they want to do. And believe me, hundreds and hundreds of houses are being taken subject to all over North America every single day. I've done several hundred of them myself. Subject to works well for you, but there is a downside in it for the seller that I am about to explain. There is an alternative to subject to if this downside is something you must deal with. So I want to try to explain to you what I did to counter that downside on a recent subject to deal that I did. I have a board here. Can you see that okay, Nick?
Yep.
All right. There was a house down the street from me here that I recently bought, and it's a nice house. It's a 3-year-old house in a gated community, about a $400,000 house, give or take, and the sellers had to move, and they called us, or we called them, I don't remember which, and the house was listed with a realtor for $385,000. That listing was about to expire when they called me. And of course I told them that listing had to expire, or they had to get the realtor to release it before I could do anything. But I entered into the conversation while the listing was active because they called me. we did some comps on it, and we saw that it was worth just about their asking price, or maybe a little bit more in that area anyway. Felt the realtor had it listed a little conservative, but not much. Now they owed $351,000 on the house. It was a VA loan, and their payment was $1,925 a month, principal and interest and taxes and insurance. Now the first, when I asked the guy, will you sell the house for what you owe on it? Of course he said yes, right off. In fact, he pretty much told us that before we even got well into the conversation on the phone. Because you see, he had to leave town, and this was his goal, get rid of that payment. He knew even if the realtor sold it, he wasn't going to get much out of the sale, and that's assuming they sold it for full price. By the time they paid the commission out of that and closing costs, there's nothing left anyway, hardly. So his whole goal, get the payment off of his back. So I told him, okay, I can buy the house for what you owe on it. And I can, and he was happy with that. Now that doesn't mean I was going to write him a check for the $351, don't get me wrong. He knew clearly I wasn't going to pay off his debt. So I made it clear to him, I'll buy it, but the loan's going to stay in your name until sometime in the future when the loan is paid off, and that's the only way I can buy your house. But even that left me with two choices. Now I can tell you honestly that he would have gladly just deeded the house to me and walked off and allowed me to take over that loan, subject to if I would have let him. However, I knew that it was not in his best interest to do that, and here's why. This was a nice couple. I mean, they're still alive, they're still around, but they are a nice couple. And he had a VA loan, and I knew within the next 2 or 3 years that he was going to want to go qualify to buy another house, and because he moved to St. Louis. He told me it was going to be a while, but in the future he intended to. So here's the problem. If he would have just deeded me this house, he would have had no kind of a document whatsoever showing that this $1,925 payment was being made. You see, if the seller hands you a deed, you do own the house, because that's all it takes to transfer title, my friends, is if a seller signs a deed and hands it to you, you own the house. You don't need the lender's permission. The loan stays on it. Everything, all the liens are on it, stay on it, but you own the house. Now, he would have done that gladly, and I would own the house. But when he went to qualify for a loan, he has no way to prove that this $1,925 payment is being paid. And I knew that if I left it sit like that when he went to qualify, it was going to kill him on a debt ratio. Because you see, this would be a $1,925 outgo with no income to wash it out, and his debt ratio would have just totally taken him out of any chance of getting a loan within the next 2 or 3 years. So I didn't do it that way. Instead, I sat there in his kitchen and explained to him how I was going to buy it, and I told him I'm going to buy it on a wraparound mortgage. So here we go. It's called a wrap. Now, this wraparound mortgage is what we call them in Florida. If you live in a deed of trust state, you would call it an all-inclusive deed of trust or all-inclusive trust deed. Or it might be a land contract or a land installment contract or a contract for deed or any of those other terms, which I'm not going to try to clearly disclose right now. But any of these devices would have created the same kind of a deal and accomplished the same thing. In Florida, we use a wraparound mortgage. Okay? And here's what that is. His debt was $351. So I had my attorney create a wraparound mortgage for $351,000 from my land trust to the sellers. That means my land trust owes the sellers $351,000 now, and then of course the sellers owe out $351,000. So the seller has, well, this is why they call it a wrap. Okay, this is the underlying debt on the house. So my loan wraps around their loan. We'll make that clear. There's only a total of $351,000 owed on the house. Seller owes $351,000, I owe the seller $351,000. My payments are exactly the same as the seller's payments. The seller gets no monthly cash flow, the seller gets no more money. But what the seller does have now is a recorded mortgage and note saying that they are owed $351,000. So now when they get ready to qualify for a loan, they can take that document to the bank and show them that they are collecting $1,925 a month, which will wash out the $1,925 that they're paying and shows on their credit report. Now, am I paying the sellers direct? No, heck no. I'm paying their bank direct with their permission. The sellers will never touch my payment, but they still have the document showing that the payment is being made. And of course, their credit report will show that this payment is being made every month because it is by us. So why did I do that? To protect them. Their debt ratio now will work out for them, and also, if the seller just deeds me the house and leaves the loan in their own name, if I don't pay, they have no way to take the house back. They have no way to protect themselves. Because you see, my friends, if this wraparound device is not created here, there is no document that they can use showing that they have a claim against the house anymore. With this, if I don't pay, they can foreclose on this note. But without this, there's nothing for them to foreclose on. If they just deed me the house, I don't owe them anything. I owe their bank, but I owe them nothing. Now, however, I do owe them. I don't owe them, my land trust owes them. Yeah, be careful now, you don't ever want to sign personally on this. Never, ever, ever sign one of these personally. My land trust bought it, my trustee signed as trustee, therefore no personal liability of the trustee, no liability of the beneficiary, no liability period. The only thing that backs up this debt is this house. But just the same, the sellers can now show that they got a $1,925 income coming in because I did this. And to be honest, it cost me about $1,500 in closing costs extra just to create this document here in Florida solely for the benefit of the seller. It does not benefit me in any way whether I do a wrap or whether I take it subject to, but it benefited the seller. So I hope that goes to, I hope you can understand the difference between a subject to and a wrap, and why many times it's in the seller's advantage if you do a wrap for them to help them out of future problems which could come back on you. I'm not legally bound to make this payment if I take it subject to, but I am morally bound, so I'm going to make the payment or I wouldn't buy the house. And this way I'm technically not legally bound either. My land trust is, but anyway, this is the way that it should be done if you care about the seller with future problems. Now, many times if the seller don't care, the seller's credit's already made screwed up, and they don't care, I don't care. I'll just soon go ahead and take it subject to. But this is the way I did this one. So I hope that makes sense to you, and I hope you remember that lesson when you get an opportunity out there to either take it subject to or buy it on some kind of a wrap. Again, more discussion will have to be on what kind of device you're going to use here, and that's going to depend mostly in what state you live in. As I often tell my students wherever I go to train, most of the income that I make today in real estate is made in the pretty house business, not the ugly house business. Now, don't get me wrong, I make offers on ugly houses several times a week and buy 2 or 3 a month from banks. But that's not the discussion of this lesson. This lesson is on terms, but a specific part of terms that I like best, that I'm seeking the most in the industry. In fact, if you look on your screen right now, you'll see a copy of the property information sheet. The property information sheet that we use to screen sellers. These are the same ones that our virtual assistants call. They fill in these blanks for our students all over the country, and then they send the sheets to us. I happen to be one of the customers for this same service. And if you look in the middle of the sheet, over to the right, you'll see where the script is in one of the boxes. It says, if the house is free and clear, say these words. Now, we know it's free and clear because right above that in the box, you'll see it's 0. When they ask what the loan amount is, it says 0. And hey, you'd be surprised to know that about 1/3 of all the houses we call nationwide are free and clear. And actually, that number is actually rising a little bit as time goes on. So about 1/3 of the market is free and clear. Now take a look at the paragraph underneath. The question is that the house is free and clear. It says, will you consider taking your equity in monthly installments? And it calls for a yes or a no answer. The yes answers are the ones we're looking for there, because that means the seller is interested in terms, or at least we'll talk about terms. Terms meaning owner financing. That's the only thing that we're talking about here is owner financing if it's free and clear. Now, if it says no, if the seller says no, I'm not interested, if you look right below, you'll see that it asks the lease option question, and the goal is to determine whether, if they're not interested in owner financing, would they be in lease options? And if the answer is no and no, then the seller screened themselves out. Now, of course, the ones that say yes are the ones that I'm interested in. Of the ones that say yes, believe it or not, about a third of the total of the free and clear houses will say yes. So if you're under the impression that you got to ask 100 people to get a yes on will I own or finance, the answer is no. About a third of them will say yes right up front upon first request. Now from that point on, we have a script. Once you fill out the property information sheet, and you get the answers below, the bedrooms and the bathrooms, and is it listed and all that stuff that's on the sheet. Now you get rid of that sheet and you now go to my script. I have a script that's called, which you'll find right in front of you and down below. I pulled it right out of my boot camp manual. It's called Script to Call Back a FSBO with a Free and Clear House with a Yes on Owner Financing question. Okay, so if your VA has gotten the answers on the property information sheet for you, then you use this script word for word. If you're the one collecting the front end information from the seller, then you will eliminate the first paragraph of my script, and you will start with, okay, well listen, I've got all the facts here now that I need. You've indicated you'd take monthly payments, and now look down the arrow, follow the arrow. Well, first they say, is that correct? If they say yes, follow the arrow all the way down to the bottom, and you'll see what you need to say next if they agreed that they said that they would take monthly payments, or if you just heard them say that, okay? And here's what the bottom of the script says. It says, okay, well, what's the least you could accept on the price if we agree upon the terms? Then you shut up and you let them speak. And then you say, well, is that the best you can do? And you shut up and you let them speak, and your number will likely come down. Stop there. Don't press them too hard here on the telephone, but now you know what's on the seller's mind. Now look right below that, and this is the key, important, killer question. The question is, may I assume you will sell with nothing down? Now, my friends, that's a totally different question than will you sell with nothing down. Will you sell with nothing down means you expect them to say no. May I assume you will sell with nothing down means you expect them to say yes. If you assume that they're going to say yes, it'll come out better. They will pick it up that you intend for them to say yes, and you'll be surprised how many yeses you get. May I assume you will sell with nothing down, you will get about a third of the people that you ask that question to say yes, contrary to your current belief. Just go do it and then prove it to yourself, and we'll see how close I am. May not be a third, you might get less, you might get more. I tell you, you're going to get none if you don't read the script just the way that I wrote it here for you. May I assume you will sell with nothing down? And pause and shut up and wait for the answer. And if they do come back and say, no, I won't do that, then you say, well, then what is the least you could take down? And then you'll have your answer, and I will follow that with, well, is that the best you can do? So now, well, let me come back to that in a second. The last question is what's the lowest you could take per month? So here's what we need to know on free and clear houses. Number one, price, what's the best you can do. Number two, nothing, down payment. We must know what the seller's got in mind for a down payment and a monthly payment. And those are the critical questions, because the answer to those questions will determine whether I've got a really, really hot deal here that I want to stay in and create a golden goose out of that'll make me money for a long, long time to come, or whether I got a seller who wants retail price and a high down payment and a high monthly payment, which I'm going to turn into an axe deal and I only get one check out of. I much prefer the first than the second. However, since we have this thing called axe, we're not going to let these deals go away, because when you can collect 10, 15, 20 grand out of them, obviously you want to do that, even if you can't find one of those sweet deals you want to stay in. So let me relate that to dollars and cents for you. Let's say the seller that says they'll take $200,000 for the house, and it's free and clear. Okay? Seller number one says, yeah, I'll sell it with nothing down, and agrees to take a $1,000 a month payment for some term, which is probably going to be 3 to 5 years, give or take. And I would shoot for no interest, another subject for another time, and I'd get it about probably 60–70% of the time. But right now, no interest is not the point. The point is, sellers agreed to take a $1,000 a month payment, a nothing down, a $200,000 note to the seller. Okay? That kind of a seller is going to get my heart beaten. That kind of seller is going to turn into a goose for me, because I immediately know if the seller is taking nothing down and $1,000 a month on a $200,000 house, then whatever I get down from my buyer, I get to keep all of it. And I wouldn't put somebody in a house, a $200,000 house, on a lease purchase even, with less than $15,000 down. If I'm selling with owner financing, I expect to get 20 or more. So that's all my money. But here's the better part. If I'm paying out $1,000, I know I'm going to be collecting about $1,700, $1,800, $2,000 a month every single month, and I get to keep that difference. So I built a cash cow. I built a cash flow machine that could last for years and years and years, simply because I asked the right questions and I got a seller who really didn't want everything his way retail price. And guys, you'll be so surprised at how many people could care less about a down payment, could care less about interest, and were happy to take a lower monthly payment just to get the house sold and just to get the money coming in. Please do not try to prejudge them. Ask the questions on the script and let them tell you what they will do, instead of you trying to force it down their throat. Now, seller number two now says he wants $200,000 for the house, says he wants, he would owner finance it, but he wants $10,000 down, and he wants $1,600 a month PITI. Well, I know that if he wants retail price, and he wants a large down payment, and he wants a high monthly payment, there's very little chance that I'm going to stay in the deal, because there's no equity, there's no monthly spread. The only way I can make money is the difference between what I can collect from a down payment from a buyer and what I got to pay him. So the good news is, if he'll take $10,000 down, I expect the market to give me $20,000 to $25,000 down. So I'll simply write up the contract on his terms, as lousy as they are for me. I'll write up the contract on his terms, put it out into the marketplace, find a tenant buyer with more money down. And my friends, when I'm offering terms into the marketplace, they're everywhere. There's there's 10 times more buyers with terms than there are for all cash. So I'm the guy with the $200,000 house offering terms. So it's not about finding a buyer, it's finding one with enough money to satisfy my needs. So I know that my only game here is whatever the difference on the down payments are, and then I'm out. And I'll either assign my contract or I might even choose to stay in it. And that's another decision that you really can't make until you find that tenant, until you find that buyer. If I've got this thing under contract for $200 with 10 down at $1,000 or $1,600 a month, what if somebody does come along and wants to give me $20,000 or $30,000 down and wants to pay me $2,200 a month because I let them tell me what they pay before I open my big mouth and tell them what I had to have? Well, at that time, I'll make the decision as to whether I want to stay in it or not. But until then, I have the luxury of staying in it or getting out of it, knowing that I'm going to get paid for my services. So, seller A, gold mine, stay in, money now, money monthly, money later. Seller B, not such a gold mine, but a nice little check on an axe deal. So anyway, I hope that clears it up, and I hope you see why I like owner financing deals so much. We were sitting here talking about a $200,000 deal. Wait till you do the numbers on $1 million deal, or a $2 million deal, or a $3 million deal. Wait till you see how much money you can make with the exact same process applied to a luxury home instead of a lower end home. You're going to begin to like this business called terms. And by the way, I'm doing a 2-day retraining on it on November the 15th and 16th here in Jacksonville, and you're invited. And it's going to be 2 intense days modernizing the entire terms business, which includes seller financing and lease purchases. That would include ACS, sandwich leases, and owner financing. I'm taking the old Control Without Ownership course, the purple one, and the old green cash flow system, Pretty House cash flow system course, and I'm combining them into a 2-day event and into a new course. Now, the new course won't be published for 2 or 3 months thereafter. However, you can sit through this 2 days being at home, because we're going to simulcast it, or you can come to Jacksonville Live. If you come to Jacksonville Live, you can bring deals, and we're going to work them live in class and call your sellers for you and have you leave with contracts on orally accepted deals. If you choose to sit home and do simultaneous, or simulcast, not simultaneous, I don't know why I keep saying that, then you can download the manual and take the whole course from home and get a jump start on everybody else who's going to wait on the course. We have not set the price for the course yet when it comes out, but I can tell you it will be $1,000 or more minimum, and you have a chance to come to this event live or on simulcast for $497 and get the entire manual. So you might want to take us up on that. Just go down below and get registered. Now, we're only allowing 50 people in the room in Jacksonville, so if you want to come live, even more important, get out and get registered right now. That's a heck of a deal at $497. So go do it now. Hope the lesson was of value to you. I hope it clarifies. A lot of people come to me with questions on how to handle free and clear houses. The answer is simple. 1, determine they're free and clear. 2, determine they will take terms. Then 3, read my script. That's all you got to do. See you soon.